Part 1. Insertion and the Weight of Silence. The air was soup, thick with rot and humidity, smelling of diesel exhaust and fear. Sergeant Cash Reardon dropped 30 feet from the ladder, M16 already covering the perimeter, his boots sinking into the triple canopy floor near the headwaters of the A Shau. This wasn't an aggressive sweep. This was a static kill, a long-range reconnaissance patrol, LRRP, designed to watch, wait, and die quietly if necessary. Ghost Platoon, 6 men, inserted at 0400 hours, their objective a narrow trail designated Route 101B, a known feeder artery for NVA logistics operating out of Laos. The mission's secondary, critical objective weighed heaviest, the pouch. 2 days prior, an interdicting squad had taken an NVA runner and secured his leather dispatch satchel. Inside was a single, densely written, encrypted message, the letter they couldn't read. Command insisted it detailed a major operation, possibly the movement of heavy artillery. Cash positioned the OP, observation post, 20 feet above the trail, nestled within the sprawling roots of a banyan tree. The jungle silence immediately pressing down with physical force. It wasn't the silence of peace, but the absence of American sound, an unnatural quiet that meant the enemy was listening too. Specialist Rourke, the team's comms and code specialist, had spent the entire flight time and the first 4 hours on the ground staring at the message, his headlamp casting a dull yellow glow onto the water-stained paper. Rourke finally whispered, his voice cracked with exhaustion, that the cipher was beyond standard recognition. It looked like a complex variation of a rotating polyalphabetic key, possibly a one-time pad. Cash had only grunted. Their job was observation and survival. But if they couldn't decipher the NVA's intentions, their waiting would be useless, merely delaying an inevitable, fatal confrontation they wouldn't see coming. The first 8 hours were pure inertia, the agonizing, slow crawl of time measured only by insect bites and the steady drip of condensation from the canopy. The duality of their existence was stark, absolute stillness demanded by survival juxtaposed against the frantic mental race to break the code that held their fate. Part 2. The Decipher Challenge. Days bled into one another, marked only by the shifting light filtering through the dense green filter above. The waiting became an existential threat, eroding the discipline that combat forged. Cash observed his men, their faces grimed with camouflage paint and sweat, their movements minimal, almost spectral. The greatest enemy wasn't yet the NVA, but the oppressive fatigue born of hypervigilance. They had seen nothing on 101B. No shadows, no boot prints, no discarded cigarette butts, nothing. It was too quiet, indicating either a complete diversion of the supply line or that they were being perfectly watched. Rourke, meanwhile, was falling apart quietly. He hadn't slept more than 90 minutes at a stretch. The letter was spread across a poncho section, guarded against the incipient monsoon rain. He explained his failure to cache during the midday changeover. "Sarge, this isn't field encryption. It's too clean. They're not using standard military issue codes. It looks like personal cipher, maybe a senior officer's own system. I've tried transposition, substitution, Caesar shifts, nothing sticks. Without the key phrase, it's 1,000,000 to 1. Cash gripped Rourke's shoulder hard. "Rourke, the intel says artillery is moving. If they hit Da Nang with that stuff, it's Tet all over again. That letter is the warning. You find a key. You figure out what they care about most, what they'd use as a marker." He knew the request was absurd, bordering on impossible, but the necessity was absolute. They were 6 men pinned by a sheet of paper. The constant, gnawing anticipation of the ambush that might happen was infinitely worse than a clean firefight. Cash enforced trigger discipline not just on their weapons, but on their minds. Every flicker of doubt, every wave of claustrophobia had to be ruthlessly suppressed. The waiting was the crucible, separating the men who reacted from the men who endured. As the sun dipped, painting the canopy in fleeting smears of bruised orange, Rourke finally found a minor statistical anomaly in the text, a repeating, 3-letter sequence that defied normal Vietnamese phonetics. It was a thread, fragile and possibly meaningless, but it was the first sign of order in the chaos. Part 3. The first sign. At 0215 on the third night, the sound arrived. Not a sudden, loud crack, but a gradual displacement of the jungle's natural symphony. The cicadas muted unevenly, and a pair of night birds ceased their calls too abruptly. Cash, who hadn't slept since insertion, felt the shift in his bones. The sound wasn't coming from Route 101B. It was coming from the west, moving parallel to their position, slightly downhill. He signaled the team. Contact, silent approach, 3/4 high. They froze, heartbeats roaring in their ears. Two figures emerged from the gloom, silhouettes against the faint luminescence of the fungi on the forest floor. They were NVA, but not standard infantry. These were scouts, or possibly sappers, dressed lightly, armed with AK-47s, but moving with the lethal, unnatural grace of trackers. They weren't using the path. They were flanking it, moving directly toward the base of the banyan tree. This confirmed Cash's worst fear. The NVA knew, or perhaps more frighteningly, the coded message contained intelligence detailing counter-reconnaissance patrols, and they were walking into a planned sweep. Cash mentally calculated the angles. They were too close for rifles. Any engagement would expose their full position to the main force that must surely be nearby. It had to be silent, immediate, and utterly clean. Specialist Mac McIntyre, the team's heavy weapons man, was positioned closest to the path the scouts were taking. Mac's leg began to tremble slightly. Cash watched with agonizing slowness as Mac shifted his weight, fighting the urge to move a leech that had attached itself to his neck, swollen fat on his blood. If Mac flinched, they were all compromised. The lead NVA scout stopped directly below Mac, scanning the branches overhead, his face a dark smear of concentration. The seconds stretched into geological ages. The duality of their existence dissolved entirely. The waiting was over, replaced by the breathless, terrifying prelude to unavoidable violence. Part 4. The Scout Takedown. Mac did not flinch. The leech burst silently on his neck as the scout moved on. Cash gave the signal. Execute. It was a masterpiece of lethal precision, honed by countless hours of training for this single, desperate moment. Sergeant Vance and Mac dropped simultaneously from the lower branches onto the two sappers. Vance used a length of piano wire, snapping the neck of his target with brutal efficiency before the man could even raise his hands. Mac used a fighting knife, driven up and under the ribcage, twisting the blade to ensure immediate circulatory collapse. The entire engagement lasted less than 6 seconds. There was no noise louder than the muffled thump of the bodies hitting the muddy ground. The stench of fresh blood, metallic and hot, instantly mixed with the jungle musk. They secured the bodies quickly, dragging them into the dense undergrowth and covering the blood trails with dirt and leaf litter. Cash's hands shook slightly, not from fear, but the residual adrenaline of the violence. They searched the bodies for intelligence. Standard issue field radios, minimal rations, and, critically on the lead scout, another dispatch pouch. This pouch contained a second, shorter, seemingly unrelated message, also encrypted, wrapped tightly in oilskin. Rourke's face, pale and strained, suddenly registered the first hint of relief in days. "Sarge," he whispered, clutching the two messages, "this is it. They use rotating keys. That first message is the primary operational intel. This second one, this is the key to the first one, or maybe the key to the next one. They stack them. It's a Vigineer cipher, but they use the operational intel from the last patrol as the key for the current one." The silent confrontation had given them the means to break the paralyzing silence of the waiting. The cost was 2 enemy lives, but the potential payoff, predicting the NVA's maneuver, was priceless. Part 5. The Breakthrough and the Dilemma. Rourke worked with frantic intensity, pitting the two coded messages against each other, the small victory fueling his exhausted mind. He used a compass needle and a tiny piece of plastic as his makeshift tools. The jungle, now aware of the quick violence, settled back into its deceptive silence. After nearly 40 minutes of meticulous comparison and decoding based on the identified anomaly, Rourke cracked the primary cipher. The message, scrawled in clean, precise Vietnamese, was chillingly brief. Convoy proceeds via subterranean water, Route B, 5 tonight. Bypass 101B. Confirm clearance by 0400. The intelligence was a crushing revelation. The massive arms shipment, the target of their entire mission, was not using the conspicuous mountain trail they had been watching. It was using an ancient, choked-out stream bed, Route B5, running deep beneath the canopy, a route cache had dismissed as impassable during the dry season, but which the monsoon rains had made navigable by shallow draft boats or men carrying heavy loads. And they were moving to Night Dash. The immediate dilemma slammed into cache: exfil or interdict. Their primary task was reconnaissance and reporting. They could signal command, give them the route change and the encryption key structure, and extract, surviving to fight another day. But by the time a reaction force was mobilized, the convoy would be deep in the supply network, the heavy artillery ready to deploy. If they engaged, they were committing 6 men against a full logistics company, almost certainly a death sentence. But they were already in position. They had the element of surprise. Rourke, Cash demanded, "Are you absolutely sure of the timing?" Rourke nodded, pointing to the word "for tonight." Cash made the decision instantaneously, bypassing the chain of command. "We move. We are the reaction force. We hit the stream bed. We won't stop the whole thing, but we'll stop enough to gum up the works and buy command time for the air assets. Send the confirmation of the route change and the key analysis immediately. Then destroy the radio." The agonizing wait was traded for imminent, desperate combat, a calculated sacrifice. Part 6. The Unseen River. The team moved with urgency, ditching non-essential gear, taking only water, ammunition, and fragmentation grenades. They descended from the banyan perch, moving downslope toward the hidden stream bed known as B5. The descent was treacherous, the soil slick and unforgiving. The environment changed drastically. The dense triple canopy above gave way to a subterranean darkness, a world of perpetual twilight even at midnight. The air was colder, thick with the smell of stagnant water and decaying biomass. They located the entrance to the stream path, a break in the rock formation where the water, now swollen by the early monsoon, flowed into a deep, muddy channel, partially covered by overhanging vines and huge, parasitic roots. It was a perfect, natural ambush point. They set up their last 2 claymore mines, positioning them low, angled to shred legs and cargo simultaneously. Vance armed a series of trip flares, setting the thin wires across the approach routes, marking the edges of the kill zone. The stream bed was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 men abreast. If the NBA convoy was as large as the message implied, they would be funneled directly into the blast radius. The sound of the flowing water masked most other noise, which was both a blessing and a curse. They could hear the enemy less clearly, but the enemy would hear them even less. The agonizing duality returned, amplified tenfold. They were no longer waiting to be killed. They were waiting to kill, pressed against the cold, damp rock, anticipating the sudden shift from silence to catastrophic noise. Cash checked his remaining magazines. He focused on the discipline of breathing, slowing his intake, tried to merge his heartbeat with the distant, rhythmic chirping of the jungle, waiting for the heavy, unmistakable sound of boots and cargo moving through the flowing water. Part 7. Sensory overload and fear. Time became a viscous, slow-moving medium. The darkness was absolute, save for the faintest glow stick illuminating Rourke's position behind a small boulder. The waiting here was fundamentally different from the quiet paranoia of the OP. Here, the fear was primal, generated by the claustrophobia of the confined space and the certain knowledge that the enemy was only minutes away. Cash felt the familiar metallic taste of adrenaline in his mouth. He thought about a previous patrol, a 3-day wait in a foxhole near the DMZ, where a young private, broken by the sheer emptiness of the jungle, had hallucinated an entire NVA platoon attacking and had tried to surrender to a tree stump. The waiting, Cash concluded, was designed to break the mind so the body followed easily. He focused on the sounds the water should make. Then he heard it. Not boots, but the dull, repetitive clank of metal hitting rock, muffled by the water. They were carrying something heavy, ammunition crates or the dismantled artillery pieces themselves. The muffled noise was instantly followed by the heavy, rhythmic tread of dozens of men moving carefully through the treacherous stream. The column was moving slowly, expertly navigating the treacherous, flooded path. Cash estimated at least 50, perhaps 60 men, judging by the density of the sound. He raised his hand, signaling absolute silence. The NVA point man, moving with unnerving confidence, passed the first trip flare, then the second. The heavy smell of wet canvas and sweat drifted into their position. Cash waited until he could distinguish the shapes of the lead elements. At least 4 men, tightly packed, carrying large, square objects wrapped in burlap, directly centered in the kill zone. Part 8, the engagement. Cash dropped his hand, a swift, final gesture. Mine, detonate. The dual claymores detonated with a deafening, localized roar, tearing the night apart. Thousands of steel balls shredded the lead element of the NVA column. Screams, immediate, sharp, and cut short, were followed by the sound of collapsing bodies and heavy equipment splashing into the stream. The trip flares, activated by the concussion, cast a strobe of red light across the horrific scene. Chaos erupted. The NVA troops in the middle and rear of the column immediately dropped their cargo and began returning fire, blindly shooting toward the flash of the claymores. Ghost Platoon opened fire with short, controlled bursts. The confined space amplified the sound of the M16S to unbearable levels. Cash focused on target acquisition, double-tapping any moving shadow. He knew they had maybe 90 seconds before the NVA reorganized and flanked them, using the stream banks for cover. Specialist Rourke, fighting the urge to empty his magazine into the panic, focused only on his job. The crucial intel, the location of B5 and the key structure of the NVA cipher, had to be transmitted. He frantically worked his short-range radio, sending the burst transmission. Just as the send light flashed green, a burst of AK fire slammed into the boulder beside him, the fragmentation hitting his radio and shattering the housing. He screamed, clutching his forearm, which was bleeding profusely, but the message was gone. It had transmitted. They had done their job, but the enemy was now fully engaged, realizing the ambush was confined to this small sector. Grenades began bouncing off the stream bank. Cash roared, "Fall back." Miller, "Cover fire. We're out." The combat was pure, close-quarters devastation. The waiting had exploded into a reality far more terrifying than they had imagined. Part 9, Retreat and Sacrifice. The withdrawal was immediate and brutal. Vance and Mac grabbed Rourke, pulling him toward the rear exit, a narrow, slick crevice in the stream bank. Cash paused, watching the NVA advance. They were disciplined. Despite the heavy losses from the claymores, they were already moving forward, determined to annihilate the ambushers. 2 men of Ghost Platoon were now useless for fighting. Rourke with his arm wound, and Private First Class Hayes, who had taken shrapnel to the leg. They needed cover, a solid wall of fire to suppress the oncoming wave long enough to slip into the high ground. Specialist Miller, the young man whose nervousness Cash had often worried about, stepped forward without a word. He stripped the belt of ammunition from his M60 and positioned himself behind a small outcrop of rock. He met Cash's gaze, a terrifying calm replacing the fear. "Go, Sarge. Give me 60 seconds." Cash knew this was the end of Miller. There was no time for argument, only necessity. 30 seconds, Miller. We'll cover your extraction point. But they both knew it was a lie. Miller nodded, shouldering the M60. As the rest of the team scrambled through the crevice, Miller opened fire, the deafening roar of the heavy machine gun overwhelming the stream bed. He laid down a terrifying volume of fire, pinning the NVA command element. Cash glanced back just as a concentrated burst of automatic fire ripped into Miller's chest, lifting him off his feet and slamming him into the stream bank. The machine gun fell silent. They had their 60 seconds. The sacrifice was absolute. The remaining 4 men scrambled upward, the sound of the pursuing NVA crashing through the water below them. The duality of combat and waiting had dissolved entirely. Now, there was only running, only surviving long enough for the sacrifice to mean something. The decoded letter, the secret they had risked everything for, was now only a grim reminder of the price paid for intelligence. Part 10. The Echoes and the Aftermath. They didn't stop running until they reached the pre-established emergency extraction zone, 500 meters uphill. They stumbled out of the jungle brush as the sounds of pursuit faded into the distance, replaced by a much louder, more resonant sound, the distinct, rhythmic thump of incoming slicks. Huey sent to pull them out. Rourke's message had gotten through. The intelligence acted upon instantly. The remaining members of Ghost Platoon collapsed onto the soaked earth, their lungs burning, covered head to toe in black mud, blood, and the residue of gunpowder. They were yanked aboard the first chopper, the roar of the engines swallowing the last vestiges of the jungle's oppressive silence. Cash, strapped into his seat, looked down as they ascended, catching a fleeting glimpse of the stream path B5. Hours later, from the relative safety of the rear base, they received confirmation. The intelligence was successful. The decoded route and key structure allowed the Air Force to target B5 with surgical precision, utilizing B-52s to collapse the stream path and destroy the bulk of the NVA convoy, including the heavy artillery. The mission was declared a catastrophic success for intelligence, achieved at a devastating cost. Cash sat alone, long after debriefing, cleaning the mud and blood from his rifle. In his pocket, he still held the captured, now uselessly decoded letter. Its contents, once the focus of days of paralyzing fear, were irrelevant now. It wasn't the reading of the letter that saved lives, but the act of breaking the code that forced the confrontation, compelling them to leave the safety of waiting and enter the necessary violence. The terror of the silent jungle was gone, replaced by the sterile hum of the base hospital. But the most profound silence remained, the absence of Vance and Miller. The war was full of these echoes, moments where the sheer agony of waiting transitioned instantly into lethal, defining combat, forcing men to sacrifice everything for a secret they never wanted to know.